celebration of
That is,
life.
that is the other thing, man. I know that all of these talking points have kind of already happened, but like pretty interesting that global warming and emissions have gone down so much. Like people aren't going as many places and we're not fueling as many things, and so it just all of a sudden is just nicer outside as well.
I, I I'm reluctant to take the conversation here, but like one of the things that someone brought up to me, and I thought it was really interesting in the global warming conversation was it's like, all right, look, we're still raising the same animals because I was vegan for several years, and part of the reason I did it was for the environment because I talked about how animal agriculture was responsible for such a big amount of greenhouse gases. And I'm so sorry for bringing up veganism in this conversation, but one of the big things they're noticing is like even with all this production happening, I don't think factory farms are good, blah blah blah. But the observation is like the real issue here is that we're still burning coal, we're still burning fossil fuels and coal and all these things, and the actual cause of emissions, as we're seeing because it's clearing up, is like our modes of transport, the energy that we're burning, and all these different things. And you know, I think in terms of looking at different ways, because there are a few issues that are going to come out of this on the other end. We're going to be looking at food security because now food supply chains are starting to break down, which is like a thing that's just starting to happen. We're looking at, after the economy opens back up, well, are we just going to go driving in our cars again and keep burning all the fossil fuels we've been burning, or are we going to actually invest the time and energy into, like right now it's kind of like we have a blank slate. What are we going to do with it?
Please, history don't repeat itself. Please, history don't repeat itself.
Like for God's
It's
sake.
it's really interesting. I was saying the other day that like let's picture this was all nature's way of trying to push us into creating clean tech, for example, which would be the next natural step. I don't even really feel celebratory anymore. Like I'm not like, yeah, clean tech. That would be like 30 years ago. If in 30 years ago they started to do it, it'd be like, wow, we're really getting ahead of the curve. And we can be like, wow, clean tech. Now it's just kind of just standing here, just
Took you long
like
enough.
even if they created it tomorrow, you'd be like, of course you created it, motherfucker. Like it's not like this like, wow, we did it. It's like you dumb motherfuckers really, really hurt everyone in
This is
order to
just
finally
obvious.
do
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
it's the
I
same
just
thing.
think
Like I feel the same way with like factory farming and like pretty much any production model that we've been doing. It's like, yeah, of course you stopped doing that. It was disgusting and appalling. Like I'm not going to
okay,
give you a pat on the back.
one more question about veganism because a lot of my friends are vegan and there's something very respectable about that diet and about that lifestyle. Can I ask you, you were vegan and now I know that you're mostly plant-based, so it's kind of like saying pretty much vegan. But what is that shift in identity for you, and what would you say is kind of where you're at with that whole thing right now? And we can just move off this subject right after that if you want.
Yeah. Just like in the most abbreviated form. I think I wrote an article a while ago called "The Colon of Ethical Eating," and that article talked about how veganism is sort of looked at as like a universal solution to a lot of problems, including animal cruelty, including environmental issues, and all sorts of production things, and basically saying it's like if you just eat plant-based, then automatically you can tick off all the boxes of all these like virtuous ethics within your consumerism. And I looked into that, and I actually spent a couple of years studying agricultural models and soil health in particular. One of the things that I was really kind of wondering about when I was vegan, I was like, man, everything that I'm eating right now is imported from another country. Like I think maybe like 2% of the food, I was like maybe the apples and potatoes that I'm getting are actually from Canada, let alone Alberta where I live, right? So I was kind of curious. It's like I wonder what the environmental impact of my vegan diet is that I'm following for environmental reasons, right? So I started studying agriculture, and I got on the topic of soil health and topsoil health, and learned that a lot of monoculture crops and a lot of the food that I was eating contributed to soil degradation over time and stripped the fertility from the soil. And I was like, shit, that's not a really good thing. How do we avoid that? And I learned about a farm that raises pasture-raised cattle in the States called White Oak Pastures. And they're one of the only agricultural models that actually creates a net carbon sink by the way that their grazing patterns regenerate soils and then sequesters carbon into the soil. And I found that super interesting. I was like, wait, so, you know, I watch Cowspiracy like most vegans, and I was like, okay, so raising cattle is bad for the environment because it creates, you know, carbon, and it has a terrible carbon footprint. But then there's this other place that's not doing factory farming, it's pasture raising its cattle, and it's actually sequestering carbon into, like, from the atmosphere into the ground and creating a net carbon sink. And so even though this thing where it's like, okay, beef is more environmentally damaging was what I was taught, I actually learned that certain regenerative agricultural practices, and this is something like Alan Savory, this guy from South Africa, who learned the hard way, in terms of he discovered that you could use ruminants that were grazed in a particular way to regenerate soil and reverse desertification. Ruminants, yeah, like large four-legged creatures like cows or bison or ruminant animals.
That might be one of my new favorite words. Thank you.
Ruminant. So there were a few different things that I was concerned about over time with you know, adhering to vegan principles specifically. One was that the consumption choices that I made as a vegan weren't as ethical as I couldn't just say I'm vegan, therefore ethical. So I had to think a little bit more deeply and nuanced about my consumption choices. And this is just for my own personal preference, you know, like I like to feel good about what I eat. Like I wasn't eating any local food, which I'm a really big believer in supporting local agriculture. I was supporting monoculture crops that were really bad for topsoil. We only have about 6 years of topsoil left, according to some studies, which is like a mortifying number, because that's going to cause some major food security issues. And so I kind of moved away from veganism as a whole and tried to focus more on locally raised food from farms that I knew were practicing some form of regenerative agriculture. So I did end up starting to eat a lot more grass-fed beef, for example, that I knew was like, I would actually look up the farm and sometimes even contact the farmers and ask how they were managing their livestock. But so in that sense, you know, the biggest obvious ethical barrier is like, I'm still killing an animal to eat it. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, I'm killing an animal to eat it, but there's also, and I know vegans hate this argument, but there's also tons of bykill that happen in monoculture crops with pesticides, with clear cutting forests. And I'm not talking about eating, factory farmed animals that are fed grains and other things. I'm talking about, like ruminants that are holistically managed to regenerate soil and sequester carbon, like specifically going from a perspective of the least environmental harm as possible. So that's kind of why I moved away from veganism just as a blanket term and kind of moved more towards focusing on local regenerative agriculture.
I'm so sorry to ask more questions about this. I'm just genuinely curious. Has it been hard for you to move from that? And has there been people that have been upset with you in general?
Of course. Of course. Like when you're vegan, it's not like you're saying I'm eating a plant-based diet. It's saying I am vegan. You know, it's a part of your identity. I mean, I have several friends who have vegan tattoos, and this is almost like a coming out, because I still have friends who are vegan who think that I am totally adherent to the vegan code of ethics, so to speak, and think that I don't use any animal products in anything that I do. And, you know, I won't wear like a Canada Goose jacket or shit like that, you know, but
you're not actually going to start clubbing like seals yourself.
Ideally, in a perfect world, I would kill
just like
death to all animals is actually.
You're not even using the animal, Anthony. What are you doing?
But so there was the issue of like tearing away from an identity that I built up for a long period of time, where it's like, man, I kind of have to let go of I have to take away the little plant emoji from my Instagram handle. And like, and then, yeah, of course, like friends disagree with my perspectives, even if I explain it in as clear as and rational and well thought out way as possible. And I feel like there's a lot of justification that needs to happen. At this point, you know, I'm explaining my reasons for my choices, but I've moved away from veganism to trying to be as much of an ethical consumer as possible in my food choices. And that feels the most ethically aligned with me.